You've seen Band of Brothers, you know the name Dick Winters. But what you don't know is that behind the scenes, there was tension between the real-life hero and the people telling his story. And at one point, Winters had enough, he left. This wasn't about ego, this was about something much bigger. The reluctant hero. He wasn't the kind of man who craved attention. After leading Easy Company through some of World War II's toughest battles, he walked away from the spotlight. While other veterans told their stories, he kept his quiet. But when Hollywood decided to turn his life into a TV series, everything changed. Winters grew up in Pennsylvania, born in 1918. He wasn't flashy, just disciplined and focused. When World War II broke out, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and joined the 101st Airborne Division. That's where he became part of Easy Company, a unit that would go down in history. His big moment came on D-Day, June 6, 1944. After parachuting into Normandy, he led a small group of men in an attack on a German artillery position at Brecourt Manor. They took out 4 heavy guns that were firing on American troops landing at Utah Beach. Military experts later called it a perfect small unit attack. To Winters, it was just another mission, one that kept his men alive. That mission never ended. He led Easy Company through Operation Market Garden, the Battle of the Bulge, and the final push into Germany. He made decisions that saved lives. His men trusted him because he never asked them to do something he wouldn't do himself. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross and multiple Bronze Stars, but he never cared about medals. He just wanted to do his job. When the war was over, Winters left the military and disappeared from public life. No interviews, no big speeches. He ran a farm supply business in Pennsylvania and moved on. But in 1992, historian Stephen Ambrose wrote Band of Brothers, a book based on interviews with Easy Company veterans. It became a bestseller, and suddenly people wanted to know everything about Winters. Hollywood came calling. HBO and Tom Hanks wanted to turn Band of Brothers into a TV series. Winters wasn't thrilled. He knew how movies twisted real stories, and he didn't want his men turned into Hollywood characters. He agreed to help, but only if they got it right. What he didn't know was that Hollywood had its own idea of what right meant, and soon he'd realize just how far they were willing to bend the truth. Hollywood's attempt to get it right. When HBO announced Band of Brothers, they promised one thing: accuracy. This wasn't going to be just another war movie with over-the-top action and made-up drama. Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, fresh off Saving Private Ryan, wanted this to feel real. They brought in historians, military advisors, and most importantly, the real men of Easy Company, including Dick Winters. At first, Winters was cautious. He had spent decades avoiding the spotlight. Now, Hollywood wanted to tell his story to millions. He wasn't against the idea, but he had one demand: they had to get it right. That meant no exaggerated heroics, no fake drama, and no changing the facts for entertainment. HBO agreed. They went all in on realism. They built a massive training camp where actors lived like soldiers, marching, shooting, and learning Easy Company's tactics. They studied real interviews with the veterans and followed Ambrose's book closely. Everything from uniforms to battle strategies was designed to match history. To make sure the story was accurate, the producers invited Winters and other Easy Company members to review scripts. They wanted feedback straight from the men who lived it. At first, Winters was impressed. The attention to detail was there. The effort was real. But as filming got closer, cracks started to show. Some changes were small. Things like simplified dialogue or shifting events slightly to fit the pacing of a TV show. Winters understood that. What he didn't understand was when the show started altering personalities. He saw characters being turned into something they weren't. Some made to look weaker, others made more reckless. Worse, certain moments felt staged for drama rather than showing what really happened. Winters wasn't alone in his concerns. Other veterans raised red flags too. They saw emotional moments being rewritten, friendships exaggerated, and some people left out entirely. Still, Winters wanted to trust the process. He believed the bigger picture mattered, that if Band of Brothers inspired future generations to learn about Easy Company, maybe some minor inaccuracies were worth it. But as production moved forward, Winters began to realize something. Hollywood wasn't just telling their story, it was shaping it. And soon, he would face a moment where he couldn't just sit back and let it happen. The Damian Lewis Dilemma. When HBO cast Damian Lewis as Dick Winters, they knew they had a challenge. Winters wasn't just a war hero, he was a man of discipline, humility, and quiet leadership. Getting that right wasn't easy. Lewis, a British actor, had to transform into an American paratrooper, and not just any soldier, one of the most respected leaders of World War II. At first, Winters was skeptical. He had never heard of Damian Lewis, and he wasn't sure any actor could truly capture who he was. Winters wasn't loud or flashy. He wasn't the kind of leader who barked orders or craved recognition. He led by example, calm, firm, and always in control. Could a Hollywood actor really understand that? To prepare for the role, Lewis studied everything about Winters. He read Band of Brothers, watched real interviews, and even spoke with the men who had served under Winters. He trained for weeks with military advisors, learning how to walk, talk, and command like a true officer. Then came the biggest test, meeting Dick Winters himself. When the two finally sat down, it wasn't some grand Hollywood moment. Winters didn't give a speech or shower Lewis with advice. He was direct. He told Lewis one thing mattered most: get it right. Don't turn me into something I'm not. Lewis listened. He knew this wasn't just another role. This was a real person's life, someone who had made life or death decisions, who had watched his men die, who had carried the weight of war. Winters wasn't just a character. He was a leader, and Lewis had to respect that. But no matter how hard Lewis worked, Winters still had doubts. As filming began, he saw things that didn't sit right. Certain scenes felt too dramatized, and at times his character seemed more emotional than he really was. Winters was a man of control. He didn't break down, he didn't lose his temper, and he certainly didn't need Hollywood-style intensity to get his point across. What Winters couldn't accept. At first, Dick Winters tried to be patient. He knew Band of Brothers wasn't a documentary. He knew Hollywood had to make certain adjustments for pacing and storytelling. But as he watched the scripts come to life, he started to see something that didn't sit right with him. Scenes were being stretched, tweaked, or rewritten to add drama. Conversations he never had were suddenly part of his story. Some moments made his men look less disciplined, as if they needed to be whipped into shape rather than the highly trained paratroopers they were. Other scenes pushed emotional reactions that didn't happen, making it seem like Winters was more outwardly conflicted than he really was. But what really bothered him was how Easy Company itself was being portrayed. Winters had spent the war leading by example, never asking his men to do something he wouldn't do himself. He believed in discipline, respect, and keeping emotions in check. That's why he took issue when he saw some characters being shown as reckless, angry, or unprofessional. Yes, war was brutal. Yes, soldiers got frustrated. But Winters knew his men, and the show was shaping their personalities in ways that didn't feel right. Some of the biggest changes happened in moments where Hollywood wanted higher stakes. Arguments were exaggerated. Battles became more chaotic than they actually were. Some scenes merged real events with fictionalized drama, making it hard to tell what was true and what was for entertainment. Winters also disliked the way certain soldiers were portrayed. Some had their contributions downplayed or their personalities changed. He had spent his life making sure his men got the credit they deserved, and now he felt some of them weren't being shown as they really were. At this point, Winters wasn't just concerned, he was frustrated. He had trusted the production team to respect the truth. He had given them feedback, pointed out inaccuracies, and asked them to stay true to what really happened. But now he started to wonder if they were actually listening. And then came the moment that pushed him over the edge, the moment that made him walk away from the production. The breaking point. Winters had been patient. He had given Band of Brothers the benefit of the doubt, trusting that HBO would honor the real story. But then he saw a scene that crossed the line. The exact details of what upset Winters remain unclear, but insiders say it was a moment where Hollywood took too many liberties, a scene that misrepresented either his actions, his men, or the nature of leadership in Easy Company. It wasn't just a minor tweak for drama. To Winters, it was a betrayal of the truth. He had spent his life leading by example, never losing control, never putting his men in unnecessary danger, and never letting emotions get the best of him. But now he was watching his own story turned into something he didn't recognize. When Winters voiced his concerns, the production team pushed back. They explained that some changes were necessary to keep audiences engaged. They assured him that the series still honored Easy Company's legacy. But to Winters, it wasn't about entertainment or legacies. It was about facts. And so, he made a decision no one expected. He walked away. Winters stopped consulting on the show. He distanced himself from the production, no longer reviewing scripts or offering feedback. He had done his part, tried to keep things accurate, but in the end, he refused to attach his name to something he didn't fully stand behind. The show went on without him. The actors continued filming, the scripts stayed the same, and Hollywood told the story their way. Winters, meanwhile, returned to what he always preferred, his quiet life, away from the spotlight. He wasn't interested in arguing with filmmakers or debating creative choices. He had spoken his piece. He had stood by his principles. A clash of principles. For Dick Winters, leadership was built on honesty, discipline, and responsibility. He didn't believe in taking shortcuts, whether in war or in life. But Hollywood didn't operate by the same code. After walking away from Band of Brothers, Winters kept his distance, but that didn't mean he stopped caring. He had seen firsthand how Hollywood reshaped real events, and he knew his story, Easy Company's story, was now in someone else's hands. The problem wasn't just inaccuracies, it was the way drama was forced into moments that didn't need it. Winters had fought alongside men who showed discipline and bravery under fire, but in the series, some scenes made them look undisciplined, emotional, or reckless. Some men were shown arguing when in reality, they had trusted each other completely. For Winters, this was personal. He had spent his life protecting the reputation of his men. Many of them had died in battle. They couldn't defend themselves. If Hollywood turned them into characters instead of real soldiers, what did that say about their sacrifice? Still, once the cameras were rolling, Winters knew there was no going back. The show would air no matter what. And so, rather than fight a battle he couldn't win, he chose to do what he had always done, lead by example. And as he watched the show from a distance, he knew that no matter how well Hollywood told the story, the real version would always belong to those who had lived it. The fallout behind the scenes. His absence sent ripples through the production, especially among the actors who had worked so hard to honor Easy Company's legacy. For Damian Lewis, who had spent months studying Winters' every move, it was a heavy blow. Lewis had done everything he could to get the role right, training, reading, and even meeting Winters in person. He respected the man deeply, but now, Winters had distanced himself from the project. Did that mean the show had failed him? The rest of the cast and crew felt the weight of his absence too. They had worked closely with Easy Company veterans, trying to capture their stories as accurately as possible. But Winters' departure raised questions. If the man at the heart of the story no longer supported it, what did that say about the production? Despite this, HBO didn't change course. The scripts were locked, the filming schedule was set, and millions of dollars were already invested. Rewrites weren't an option. The show had to move forward. Some of the real Easy Company veterans had mixed feelings. While many of them appreciated the effort Band of Brothers put into telling their story, some shared Winters' frustrations. They saw moments that felt too Hollywood, where arguments were exaggerated or events were altered for dramatic effect. Others, however, stood by the show, believing it captured the spirit of what they had been through, even if some details weren't exact. They saw it as a way to educate future generations about their sacrifices. Through it all, Winters remained silent. He never publicly condemned the show, nor did he go out of his way to praise it. He simply let it exist, separate from the truth he had lived. For the actors, it was a difficult position. They had poured their hearts into their roles, honoring the men they portrayed. But no amount of training or research could change one simple fact: Hollywood and history would never be the same thing. And while Winters had stepped away, the biggest question remained: would he ever watch the final version of his own story? The show without Winters. With Dick Winters stepping away, Band of Brothers continued without him. The production team stuck to their vision, filming scenes based on the scripts Winters had already criticized. For HBO, the goal was to create a compelling series that honored Easy Company, but for Winters, it was now a version of events he no longer controlled. As the show neared completion, anticipation grew. HBO had spared no expense. The series had a budget of $125 million, making it one of the most expensive war dramas ever produced. With Damian leading the cast, alongside a mix of rising stars and seasoned actors, it was set to be a television event. But one question loomed: would Winters watch it? According to those close to him, Winters had no plans to tune in. He wasn't interested in seeing how Hollywood had shaped his life. He already knew what was real. He had lived it. Still, Band of Brothers premiered on September 9, 2001, and became an instant hit. The attention to detail was praised, with critics calling it one of the most realistic portrayals of war ever filmed. The battle sequences were intense. The camaraderie between soldiers felt genuine, and audiences connected deeply with the story. But even with all the praise, some veterans, including those who had served under Winters, shared his concerns. They recognized certain moments were stretched for dramatic effect, with emotions heightened and conflicts exaggerated. Some felt the portrayal of Easy Company leaned too much into Hollywood's version of heroism, rather than the quiet professionalism they had prided themselves on. Despite his frustrations, Winters never spoke out against the show. He remained gracious, acknowledging the effort behind it, even if it wasn't what he had wanted. Those who knew him best said he viewed the series with measured respect, appreciating that it introduced a new generation to Easy Company, while also recognizing the limits of Hollywood storytelling. For Winters, Band of Brothers was not his story. It was HBO's interpretation of it, and whether it was a masterpiece or a missed opportunity, it no longer belonged to him. The version Winters wanted. Dick Winters never expected perfection. He knew a 10-hour television series couldn't capture every detail of Easy Company's experiences. But if he had been in control, the final version would have looked very different. For starters, Winters would have cut out the exaggerated drama. He didn't believe in forced conflict or emotional outbursts just to make scenes more exciting. He led with calm authority, and his men followed because they trusted him, not because they needed dramatic speeches or Hollywood-style confrontations. He wasn't a larger-than-life figure. He was a soldier who did his job. One of his biggest frustrations was how certain soldiers were portrayed. Some men were given traits that didn't match their real personalities, while others had their roles minimized or altered. Winters believed that every man deserved proper recognition. If someone was shown as reckless or unsure when they had actually been disciplined and professional, it wasn't just inaccurate. It was disrespectful to their memory. Winters also disliked how the battles were presented. The series got a lot right: the fear, the chaos, the brutality of war, but some moments felt too stylized. Hollywood had a habit of making things more dramatic than they actually were, even when reality was dramatic enough on its own. Above all, Winters would have wanted a more restrained, authentic tone. He had always been a man of discipline and control, and he expected the same from how his story was told. He didn't want to be turned into a symbol or a TV hero. He just wanted the truth. That's why he walked away. He knew that once the cameras were rolling, the real story was no longer in his hands. He couldn't stop Hollywood from making changes, but he could choose not to endorse them. Still, Band of Brothers became one of the most respected war series of all time. And even though it wasn't the version Winters would have told, it ensured that Easy Company's story would never be forgotten. But the question remained: did Winters ever make peace with it? Winters never fully embraced Band of Brothers, but he also never condemned it. He watched parts of it, but those close to him said he remained detached. When Damian Lewis asked for his thoughts, Winters simply told him, "You did a good job." It was as close to approval as he ever gave. He never sought fame or recognition. What mattered most was that Easy Company's real story lived on, not in Hollywood, but in the memories of the men who had been there.